بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Welcome everybody to Project Ihya Podcast. Alhamdulillah, today we have a very special guest with us, Brother Daniel Haqiqatjou. And first I just want to welcome him and say Jazakallah for giving us his time.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Yes, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here speaking with you.
Jazakumullah khair. So Brother Daniel Haqiqatjou is native here. I guess you can say almost. He was born in Houston, Texas. He studied physics as an undergraduate at Harvard University and his graduate studies in philosophy at Tufts University. Brother Daniel has also studied and kept a close relationship with many traditional ulama as well. And mashallah, he has written nearly 1,000 articles on contemporary issues surrounding Muslims and modernity over the course of around the last 10 years. And mashallah, he's also spoken at many universities and mosques around the world around basically those same topics: modernity, Islam, and traditional Islam. He's also the founder of the Muslim Skeptic as well as Al-Asna Institute, where I believe you can find most of his articles and courses. And I think it's important to mention that he does offer classes and courses on Al-Asna Institute, and I'd encourage anyone that is interested in these topics to do go to his website, inshallah, and sign up for those courses and classes. So alhamdulillah, one of the other important things about Brother Daniel Haqiqatjou is that he has debated extensively in defense of Islam. And for that reason, he has a keen focus on the factors that influence perceptions about Islam. And the efforts that are being made by major think tanks locally and within the Western world in the direction of how they can influence the thoughts and values of Muslim communities. Now, there are a number of these think tanks, but I'm going to let Brother Daniel, give us or run us through just how these think tanks are working to influence the direction of the Muslim mindset. And we're going to talk about a more specific example regarding one, but we get the idea from that, and inshallah we'll let the discussion go in whatever direction it goes. So jazakumullah khair, and inshallah let's take it from there, Brother Daniel.
Sure. Again, thank you for inviting me. Today I want to talk about a very important think tank, probably the most influential think tank when it comes to U.S. Foreign policy and military policy, which is RAND. And a lot of Muslims have heard about RAND, and they have a concept that RAND is this organization that tries to undermine Muslims, and they might have heard the expression battle for hearts and minds, but there's not as much information about what exactly RAND is, its background, and some of the tactics that they outline for the U.S. government to actually influence and reform Islam and Muslim societies. So today, inshallah, we're going to talk about this in more depth. I'm going to present some basic information, and we're going to go into a little bit of detail with one of their most influential research papers, which is Civil Democratic Islam by Cheryl Bernard. And we're just going to have a discussion, inshallah, because I'm sure that you all have some insights as well that you can share with us. So RAND, what does it stand for? It's an acronym. It just stands for Research and Development, R&D. And it was originally established after World War II between 1946 and 1948. So during World War II, the U.S. government was putting a lot of money into science research. Obviously, you had the Manhattan Project to develop the nuclear bomb. There's a lot of money that the government, for military purposes, had dedicated to research. So after the war ended, they wanted to continue this type of research into social, political, and economic planning. And this is why RAND was established right after World War II. And the founding figures of RAND are two individuals who were involved in World War II, General Curtis LeMay and General Henry Arnold. And these were notorious figures, basically, within the U.S. Army. Why? Because they're involved, both of them, in the firebombing of Tokyo. And people understand that the U.S. bombed Japan, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki with nuclear bombs, atomic bombs. But there was also a firebombing of Tokyo, which resulted in 100,000 Japanese deaths. And the crazy thing is that these two generals were completely unapologetic about the slaughter of 100,000 Japanese. And they said things like, when it comes to civilian firebombing, they said, we must not get soft. War must be destructive and to a certain extent inhumane and ruthless. LeMay also said, quote, there are no innocent civilians. It's their government and you're fighting a people. You're not trying to fight an armed force anymore. So it doesn't bother me so much to be killing the so-called innocent bystanders. And he also said in another instance, if we had lost the war, we'd all have been prosecuted as war criminals. So that's the kind of mindset behind the founding figures of RAND. And RAND was really critical to U.S. policy in the Vietnam War, in the Cold War against the Soviet Union, then later in the first Iraq War, the Persian Gulf War, and then in the second Gulf War, Operation Iraqi Freedom, quote unquote, in 2003. So they have been very instrumental within U.S. foreign policy and military strategy, specifically targeting social, economic policies. And after the Cold War, when the Soviet Union finally fell in the 80s, they have directed most of their attention to the Muslim world and how to reform, infiltrate, basically influence the Muslim world for the ends of U.S. foreign policy. And obviously, they are connected to Zionism, and that's what we're going to talk about specifically with Civil Democratic Islam and Cheryl Bernard.
Yeah, I guess that's one question that I had is that does that shift over towards focusing on the Muslim world happen at around the start of Zionism, or is that something that predates? Does it predate that, or?
No, the shift towards the Muslim world was during the first Gulf War, so in the 90s, basically, not with the founding of Zionism, because technically Zionism is from the 19th century. So this is way after. But with the war on terror, so the war on terror, how do we combat violent extremism, Islamic extremism? How do we combat this rise of Islamic fundamentalist terrorism? They're providing this kind of blueprint, and we're going to look at the main article, Civil Democratic Islam. How do we do this? And it's all part of this larger reform project, reforming Islam to bring it in line with liberalism, to bring it in line with secularism, with feminism. And this is a process that has happened since the beginning of the Enlightenment, since the beginning of the Enlightenment in Europe, in Britain and France. There's a project to reform religions, Christianity, reform Judaism, reform all religions. Why? Because traditional religions hold humanity back from ultimate progress and advancement to reach those Enlightenment values of freedom and democracy and liberty and equality. Religion is what is keeping people backwards mentally, so that they don't accept these values and they don't accept science, they don't accept technological advancement. These people believe in the Bible or the Quran, which says that God created the universe. But we know that it's actually based off of the Big Bang or evolution. This is the truth. But if you believe in these myths, then you're not going to be able to adopt the kind of education, the kind of technological advancement that we need to progress humanity forward.
And I think, we hear this a lot that, there's an effort to liberalize Islam, to westernize Islam. But in this episode, the special thing that we'll be seeing is the exact strategies, that are used. For example, this document, it mentions a lot of things that, people will not be aware of. Like the average Muslim, he's just going around, going about his life, and he's not, there, unfortunately, there's kind of like a sort of naiveness, but when we see, for example, some of these things, it's actually quite shocking. One question that I did have is that these think tanks, are they, they're private organizations, right? Why is it that these are, or are they like government institutions, like fully sponsored and under the government?
Well, it's the private public distinction kind of breaks down for many think tanks, because a lot of think tanks do get grants, which are given to them by institute or by granting institutions that are directly getting money from the U.S. government. So it's like one degree of separation. But RAND is even closer to the U.S. government, because they are the official think tank of the U.S. military, and they get $356 million in budget annually. So that's directly from
Wow.
taxpayer money. And they, in terms of like a think tank, like they're the mother of all think tanks. They have over 1,700 people working for RAND. They have offices around the world. Their main office is in Santa Monica, California, like very nice location close
Yeah.
to the beach. So they also grant PhDs. So they have like, it's not only a think tank, it's like a graduate school as well. So half of their staff is actually are doctorates. So
Wow.
they're well funded directly from the U.S. government, and it makes it way different than your average Washington think tank.
I
And
have
what
one
is the
question. Go
what
ahead.
is the scope of their research? Is like Islam a huge portion of their research? Do they have like are there equivalents to this document, for example, for Hinduism or Christianity or Judaism, or are those already like succeeded projects? It's on the done column.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, Christianity has already been fully reformed over 100 years ago, basically. Same with Judaism, Hinduism as well has also. It's only Muslims and Islam that have posed this kind of problem for liberal reform efforts, and there are different factors that have led into that. One of them being that we don't really have like a pope. We don't have like a centralized institution that can be infiltrated and controlled in the same way that other religions might have. That's a big reason. Also, our texts have been preserved. Like the Quran has been preserved, which is something that other religions don't have. They don't have. So when that's important for reform, like if you can, and that's one of the big parts of reform efforts, and you can kind of see it in some of the discussion in the RAND document and the Civil Democratic Islam document. If you can undermine the texts of a religion, then you open the door to all kinds of interpretations. You can say, oh, well, this hadith that you're basing, hijab on, let's say, or the idea that women should stay at home and men should have authority, for example, that hadith is fabricated, or that, there's difference of opinion on whether this was authentic or not. Like that strategy of undermining the epistemology of tradition and Islamic scholarship, that's a key part of reform. And that's very easy to do with a religion like Hinduism, where they don't even know like who the authors of the Vedas are. And they have no like consistent text that has been preserved since the supposed origins of the Vedas. But the same issue with the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, all of those textual issues that have caused actually like a lot of splintering throughout Christian history. The academic study, like that's what a lot of Orientalism is about, is taking those critiques that were used in Europe against the Bible, against Jewish texts, and bringing that against the Quran, bringing that against the Hadith. Say, look, Islam is just like Christianity and just like Judaism. Their texts are not preserved, and we can just destroy their textual basis for their religion, and that'll be easy pickings, easy to just tell Muslims, yeah, your religion supports LGBT. Didn't you know that? Like, didn't the Prophet ﷺ say to be kind? And kindness beautifies, and kindness is important. Yeah, well, be kind to LGBT. And yeah, you have these hadith and you have these verses of the Quran, but those are just fabricated based on the biases of 7th century Arabs. So you just ignore those texts. They can't do that because we do have a very strong epistemic basis for knowing that the Quran has been preserved. These are the words of God. the hadith are, preserved in the tradition or the sayings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they can't make the same move that they did with the Quran or with the Bible and the Jewish tradition, for example.
And that's not to say they're not trying. So one question I think that does come up is like, okay, now they have their research and their strategy kind of laid out in these documents, and that isn't there a fear or that Muslims will see what our strategy is? Do they not mind that, or do they not, or they just feel like most people will probably not read it, or they just don't care?
No, they're just very arrogant. Like they're very arrogant, and they do have an assumption that Muslims don't read. Muslims are not really going to be following. Like, yeah, we can just put our plans up, and we can just have this published for free to download online. And Muslims are not really going to read it or counter it. And to some extent, it's true. Like, to some extent, unfortunately, it's true, because civil democratic Islam, like one of the strategies that it discusses is it categorizes Muslims into different groups. And we can talk about those categorizations when we see some of the marker issues. But they categorize, on one, the worst are the fundamentalists, what they call the fundamentalists. And basically they're referring to like Salafi jihadis. They're the fundamentalists because they believe in jihad. They believe in implementing the Sharia. They fully including the criminal punishments, including the hudud. They believe in chopping hands and stoning, etc. So they're the worst. That's on one side of the spectrum. On the other side of the spectrum, you have the full atheist progressives who believe that Islam should have nothing to do with the running of society. Islam should have nothing to do with what people see as right and wrong. They're on the other side of the spectrum. And in between, you have a lot of different gradations. You have like the traditionalists, what they call traditionalists, or the Sufis, the Sufi traditionalists. And they say one of the strategies for how to really destroy or undermine traditional Islam is to just pit the fundamentalists against the traditionalists, create conflict, create infighting, make them the worst enemy, because those two groups are the biggest obstacle for us to be able to reform Islam, because they're the ones who are the most educated about Islam. They're the ones who are the most eloquent in preaching to the public about Islam. So we have to neutralize that group, just pit them against each other and get them into constant infighting. That makes it a lot easier for us to promote the modernists and bring the modernists up into a position of prominence, because their main opposition and they're the people who would be in the best position to refute the modernists, they're too busy fighting each other. So that's a very explicit strategy. We can look at it in the document. Explicit RAND strategy, and yet Muslims are constantly doing this. They're constantly the
old divide and conquer.
Yeah, the old divide and conquer, and it's quite pitiful that we can't get beyond this. And that's why I get slammed for constantly that, oh, Daniel is a Sufi lover, Daniel is a Salafi lover, Daniel is this, Daniel is that. And I'm attacked. Why? Because I say, how about we not fall right into the trap of RAND and the US military trying to destroy Islam? How can we avoid falling exactly into their plot? And there's so much within the Islamic tradition as well that points out the importance of, okay, there's ikhtilaf on certain issues. Don't let that ikhtilaf get to a point where you are ignoring bigger threats because you're so busy debating and fighting on these particular valid ikhtilaf issues, as opposed to the bigger threats that are threatening the ummah.
Yeah.
That gets into a bigger question.
Go ahead.
Of specific strategy, like how they are actually going about doing that, because it seems like a lot of the ikhtilafat that we have nowadays and the infighting and arguing is basically started and promoted and continued by us. Where and how do they actually fall in the picture, and where are they pushing levers, what they're actually doing? I think that'll probably be more clear when we go through some of the document. Go ahead.
I think that's good. Yeah, I was gonna say we can just pull up the document actually, since I say ليس الخبر كالعيان, we hear it all the time, but let's actually pull it up and we can go through it. And inshallah, Brother Daniel, if there's anything, specific you want me to get to, we can go through it. But, this is the title page. We can see Civil Democratic Islam. Can you talk to us about the title? Like, why that choice of words, for example? Partners, resources, and strategies.
Yeah, so I guess it's good to know who is writing this. Cheryl Bernard, you can see her name. And she's interesting because she's like a neocon, obviously, but also a hardcore feminist. And her husband is a neocon, but he's actually an Afghan immigrant named Khalilzad. Zalmay Khalilzad. And so he married Cheryl Bernard, and she was very active with a lot of secularist groups or movements in Afghanistan, like not directly necessarily on the ground, but just supporting them from the U.S. Afghan women who want freedom, they want to get out of these under the boot of patriarchal Islam. So her animosity towards traditional Islam is informed, I think, by her relationship to her husband in Afghanistan specifically. So that's important to understand. But when it comes to partners, it's referring to other modernists because, again, it's a divide and conquer strategy. We have this spectrum of Muslim views. Who are the partners that we want to tap into? And that goes back to your question that how do they actually pull the levers? One of the main ways that they pull the levers is by giving funding. Like, we need to fund our partners. We need to give our partners access to the universities. So a lot of the universities, for example, in the Muslim world, they get oversight from the government. They're very closely aligned with the government. And if the government is getting pressure from the United States that, hey, you need to reform your educational institutions to be more in line with human rights, and you need to fight violent extremism. So who are you putting in charge of your universities? Make sure these are rectors or deans that are going to put modernists in key faculty positions, for example. So things like that, or access to media networks. The U.S. is funding a lot of the media infrastructure in the Muslim world. Like, let's make sure that we put modernists, or if we're going to put traditionalists, make sure it's balanced by a modernist voice. Definitely don't put any Islamists, don't put anyone who's a fundamentalist who wants to have Islamic influence the government, or let alone khilafah or anything like that. So these are the types of levers that they will use to influence the Muslim world. But I mean, there's many other factors as well, like NGOs, who they are promoting, who they credit. So these are things that we can also discuss.
Interesting. This also helps put into perspective for a lot of Muslims of why, there are certain. It'll help them understand a lot of things that are going on normally, because I think a lot of Muslims, even now when they listen, they'll be like, okay, so they're promoting human rights and all of this. So what's wrong with that? And I think it's important for Muslims to understand, how that conflicts or comes into a problem with the traditional Islam, and how they need to rethink and re-understand what all of these terms and ideas and philosophies actually are. We live in a world where all of these things are just kind of presented as good, and anything that goes against it is bad. So that's, I think, a deeper question and search that Muslims need to go into, inshallah.
Yeah. And also we can see from the title, like Civil Democratic Islam, there's some, definitely subliminal messaging going on right there, right? So, like, what is the goal of this document? What type of Islam are they trying to drive us to?
It's not like a subtext. That's the explicit goal. They explicitly want to turn Islam into a civil, democratic, liberal, secular religion, just like Christianity. And so Christians, for example, say that, because I didn't know like the extent of the background into liberalism you wanted me to get into, because I know that with Project Ihya, you're talking about these topics, so maybe your audience is already aware of liberalism. But the whole point of turning Islam into something like Christianity is that Christians will say that, yeah, you know, religion is a personal, private thing. You know, religion and being a good Christian is about what's in your heart, you know, having the love of Jesus in your heart. That's what religion is. Religion should have no part to play in the state. There has to be 100% separation of church and state. Religion increasingly shouldn't even have a role to play in your household, in your family, because you need to have secular laws that dictate, you know, marriage and divorce, how you raise your children. That shouldn't be up to religion, because that violates human rights and that violates principles of freedom and equality. So the only place for religion is in your heart and private. Don't express it. Don't like speak about it, because that can also be a violation of human rights. For example, if you teach your kids to be a good Christian, well, your child is in a vulnerable position because you're the parental authority, and you can't. That's kind of authoritarian. It's authoritarian for you to teach them a religion when they don't have the mental maturity to choose what to believe. They have to have the right to choose. That's part of their human rights and the freedom of religion. So don't indoctrinate your children. Don't preach publicly either, because you might alienate people or make them feel like they are not good Christians, and that's also a violation of their dignity. So you shouldn't be able to do that. Obviously, you shouldn't be able to influence the laws of the land. We're a secular nation. So this is how Christianity has been completely stripped of any power, completely stripped of any relevance. And that's why the apostasy rate for Christians is so high and has been so high for the past 200 years. This is because people see religion and Christianity as, okay, as long as you're a good person, then does it really matter if you're Christian or you're not? Like, who cares? Like, it seems like this is a bunch of mythology, a bunch of rituals that I have to jump through hoops. Why? I'm a good person, so that's good enough for God. That's good enough for God, so why should I care? So that's how Christianity has been piece by piece dismantled. They want to do the same thing with Islam, but we know that Islam is supposed to be an entire way of life. Being a Muslim is not just about what you believe in your heart. It has to be something that manifests on your tongue, on your limbs. It's something that manifests in a family, in a community, and for the entire ummah collectively. So that is completely contrary to the idea of separation of church and state, completely contrary to the idea of a liberal reformed religion. And that's what this document is trying to transform Islam from that, the true meaning of Islam, to a kind of liberalized, defanged, if you can use that word. Maybe that's not the best word, but disempowered Islam.
Yeah. So let's get into the index a little bit and just cruise over it, right? So you have like mapping the
Can you
issue.
like increase the size?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So you have mapping the issues and introduction to the range of thought in contemporary Islam. So it's just like a study, right? And subhanAllah, they have studied Islam very well, and they know exactly who fits where. They put everyone in a box, and that's some
Well, if you
homework.
look at chapter 1, I mean, if you see all of those things, they're very specific issues which they know that they can get which kind of go contrary to, sorry about that, which goes contrary to the liberal, sort of mindset, like polygamy and women's dress, criminal punishments would be the hudud, and then husbands allowed to beat wives. Like, those are very particular issues which they know that they can, use or take advantage of, I guess, in their mind to fight against Islam or traditional Islam.
Yeah, they've studied Islam. They, in the same way that you have people studying, non-Muslims studying Islam in academia in the biggest Western institutions, and this is just a continuation of Orientalism. And they cite different, even Muslim scholars or academics, I should say. So Khalid Abul Fadl, if you know him at UCLA, I don't know if he's still teaching or he's too old, but they cite a lot of his work. They cite Khalid Abul Fadl, and he's a outright reformist, deviant. Yeah, so they have done their homework, and that's the thing. Like, the academic Orientalist study of Islam and policy, Western policy for controlling and manipulating Muslims, it goes hand in hand. Like, we shouldn't think of the West, whether it's in the colonial period prior to the 1940s and 50s, or the post-colonial period, the post-independent period. We shouldn't think of the West as being just completely simplistic, simple-minded. Oh, we want to kill as many people as Muslims as possible, and we just want to like use a brute force approach. That's not, yeah, there were some figures like that, but in terms of their actual policies and how to approach the Muslim world, it's very sophisticated, it's very nuanced, it's very informed. So they're approaching it in a surgical fashion. Like, we are going to splice and dice. We're going to really get into the details. We need to understand the Muslim mind. We need to understand Muslim epistemology. Like, where are they getting these beliefs? How can we best disenchant the Muslims from their religion so that they're more pliable, they're more easily manipulated in our hands, for the purposes of our interests and Israel's interests. So yeah, we should not be naive and think that they don't know anything about Islam. Yeah, they know. They're citing. They're like doing hadith criticism. Like, they're looking at the isnads, and they're looking at these different ulama. They're looking at the books of fiqh, and they are very trained in Arabic. Very knowledgeable in Arabic. They're reading in the original language, so it's quite in depth. So
Yeah, and like, let's go to chapter 2. So, finding partners for the promotion of democratic Islam, options, right? So then they've identified potential partners and broken them down. So you have the secularists, right? Secular Muslims, fundamentalists, traditionalists, distinguishing between traditionalists and fundamentalists, potentially useful democratic elements, the dangers of domestic backlash, the possibility of undermining reforms. You have the modernists. Modernism has respected intellectuals and leaders, right? It's pretty interesting. Weaknesses of the modernists, two special cases of modernism, Sufis. So this is a very, like you said, surgical approach. And even when you go through the document, they have something like they say, like, American Islam. Like, they use this word multiple times. SubhanAllah. And
If
this
you
is very
go into chapter 3 where they say the strategy, I think that's what it was. If you go back to the table of contents there.
Yeah, let me go ahead and do that. So let's go to.
So is it possible for you to summarize the sort of what their proposed strategy is? I know people can go in and read it also, but in a nutshell.
Yeah, anybody who wants to read it, they can just search Civil Democratic Islam PDF, and it'll be the first one.
Yeah, it's I can give you some of the main points, and or some of like their most salient strategies.
Yeah.
So one of the strategies that they mentioned that might be very relevant to discussions that you guys have already had in previous podcast episodes that you've had is they want to cultivate a doctrine of reformed moderate Islam as an alternative to conservative Islam generally. But one of the specific things that they want to do is emphasize maslaḥa. They want to emphasize a kind of maslaḥa reasoning, maslaḥa mursala, basically. And what does that mean? Like, you prioritize, as opposed to going off of what the zahir of the text, like the apparent meaning of the text, or to go according to what traditional fiqh opinions are in the different madhahib. You need to prioritize maslaḥa, like what is in the best public interest, and emphasize that toward kind of thinking. And why that can be effective is that when you have this purely utilitarian thinking, because that's ultimately what maslaḥa reasoning is. It's a kind of utilitarian thinking. And obviously, maslaḥa does have a place to play in traditional fiqh as well. But if you study fiqh, you know that after you've exhausted the other usul within fiqh, then only, like, if there's nothing to decide on a specific topic, then you go to maslaḥa as a last resort and do a kind of a cost-benefit analysis, or weigh the pros and cons to see what would be, what's the hukm of that particular act in question. So what these modernists try to do, and what Rand is specifically promoting, is bypass all usul al-fiqh, bypass all of the discussion of the ahkam, or all of the other indicants within the sharia, like the nusus within the sharia, bypass all of that and just think about what is in the public interest. Is it really in the public interest to, cut the hand of the thief? Even though that's what the Quran commands? Is that really, can't you get that same benefit of deterring crime by just having like a hefty fine or having a prison sentence as opposed to corporal punishment? Like, isn't the whole point of Islam to maximize benefit? So why do you even need to cut the hand? Like, why do you have to have that had? You can have the same result, the same benefit. And by the way, it's going to be better in terms of public opinion towards your government, as internationally, you're going to be more in line with human rights. So there's all of these benefits, maslaḥa, that come when you stop applying the had. Instead, have fines or put people in prison for theft, just like we have in the enlightened West. Like, that's the utilitarian reasoning. So you bypass the Quran and Sunnah, you bypass all of the fiqh opinions, and you just think according to what is going to maximize benefit. And that's why they're promoting utilitarianism. And it's that utilitarianism like that is so toxic to traditional religion, because it makes you misunderstand the purpose of religion. Religion and Islam specifically is not about maximizing your personal happiness. Islam is about submitting to Allah. So if Allah says that you should cut the hand of the thief, then we follow that because we are obeying Allah. We are obeying the lawgiver. The lawgiver, Allah, has given us the law, and He's given us the penalty for theft. And so we apply that as He has said it. And this is how all of the ulama have understood that the Quran, when Allah says to do that. But if the utilitarian psyop is that no, religion is about maximizing happiness. So whatever, the Quran is maximizing happiness for the 7th century Arabs. And the 7th century Arabs, they didn't have the technology, they didn't have the science or the understanding of psychology to know that you don't have to cut the hand of the thief to prevent theft. You just, they had to resort to that because there was no other option. But now we know. Now, because of our science, our technology, we have the prison industrial complex. We can put people in prison. We can reform them. We can rehabilitate criminals. Now we know that what's going to bring the maximum benefit to society is actually to put people in prison who are hardened thieves, for example. That's the logic that they use. But if you take that logic and apply it, you can eliminate the entirety of the Sharia. You can destroy the entirety of Islam. Because even you can say it goes beyond fiqh at that point. When you have that logic, you can even go to matters of aqidah. You can say that, well, the concept of one God, Allah, and you should only worship one God, Allah, with no partners, that was necessary to make people good and upright in 7th century Arabia. But now we know more about psychology. We know more about the way people behave. And it's not necessary to emphasize La ilaha illallah, as long as people are good people and they believe in a higher principle. That's God, right? Isn't God just a higher principle of being good and being just, right? So why do you even need La ilaha illallah? Like, why do you have to worry about that? All religions are good. All religions have this higher principle. Like, this is literally the kind of argument that someone like Jordan Peterson makes. And he's considered like a Christian intellectual, but it's just pure liberal reformism, and it's applying this basic template of the most important thing is maslaḥa, which means people's personal bodily happiness or pleasure.
Yeah, that's interesting that they take a tool within the fiqh framework called maslaḥa, which is like a tool of utility, and then they basically elevate that to, Western philosophical understanding or the philosophy of utilitarianism. Um, and you're
Yeah,
right
they
that
hijack it.
yeah, and it transgresses over from legal rulings to moral issues, then over into aqidah, like you mentioned. But it's also important to mention, I think, for people that yes, maslaha is a part of the fiqh structure, but obviously it doesn't rank very high. And there's a whole chapters are written, defining and pinpointing its where it's where it's operative. That it doesn't operate in a way where it would undermine any of the sarih or clear-cut commands of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. So that's the strategy that they're using now to make that into that point within the usul of fiqh and turning that into trying to make it sound like their Western philosophical utilitarianism.
So there's a very interesting table in this document, which is called marker issues. But before I get to that, I do want to quickly read through these. So this is chapter 3, a proposed strategy, right? So it lists some. It says the following outline describes what such a strategy might look like. Support the modernists first, enhancing their vision of Islam over that of the traditionalists by providing them with the broad platform to articulate and disseminate their views. They, not the traditionalists, should be cultivated and publicly presented as the face of contemporary Islam. Like, subhanAllah, this is something very telling, right? And even like if we go further, support the secularists on a case-by-case basis, encourage secular civic and cultural institutions and programs, back the traditionalists enough to keep them viable against the fundamentalists if and whenever those are our choices, and to prevent a closer alliance between these two groups. Within the traditionalists, we should selectively encourage those who are the relatively better match for modern civil society. For example, some Islamic law schools are far more amenable to our view of justice and human rights than others. Finally, oppose the fundamentalists energetically by striking at their vulnerabilities in their Islamic and ideological postures, exposing things that neither the youthful idealists and their target audience nor the pious traditionalists can approve of: their corruption, their brutality, their ignorance, the biased and manifest errors in their application of Islam, and their inability to lead and govern, right? And some more things. Help break the fundamentalists and traditionalists' monopoly on defining, explaining, and interpreting Islam. Identify appropriate modernist scholars to manage a website, right, that answers questions related to daily conduct and offers modernist. So basically a fatwa website, right?
Yep.
Encourage modernist scholars to write textbooks and develop curricula. Publish introductory books at subsidized rates to make them available as the tractates of fundamentalist authors. Use popular regional media such as radio to, I don't know how old this is, but to introduce the thoughts and practices of modernist Muslims to broaden the international view of what Islam means and can mean.
Well, the radio is still, like in Muslim world, they still use some of these things. They're not very advanced. But I think it'd be important here to kind of highlight what the difference they're making between modernist and traditionalists. I know you mentioned in the beginning that fundamentalists, they usually refer to as like the Salafi jihadi, or the traditionalists would be who?
We can go to that. We can go to the marker issues and see exactly how they define it. But they put madhabi type in that bracket, Sufi, like those who emphasize Sufism, like in that bracket. And this document is before the internet, right? So this is prior to internet, but they've had updated documents. And one of the main ones is, if you want to look it up at some point, promoting online voices for countering violent extremism, which is from 2013. And if you look, you talked about American Islam, like that document mentions, specific people in, American Islam. It mentions specific people, it mentions specific institutions associated with certain groups. I don't want to name names because maybe you don't want that in this episode, but that document goes into like the post-internet age. Like it's the same strategies being used, but now how do we adapt it for who are our partners now in 2013 with the internet and social media?
But that document gives actual names, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
SubhanAllah, you know, yeah. So basically, like, we're part of, like, especially in America, because America would be like home turf, right? So we're part of like a sandbox experiment, and like, we should be like even more careful nowadays. You know, who we take our knowledge from, and so on and so forth. Um,
It's more than a sandbox, because they want to use the American Muslims as a model community.
Yeah.
Like, look at the because they want to broadcast that. They want to broadcast American Muslims and American imams around the entire Muslim world. And, you know, literally taking them on global tours, like some of these imams who meet their definition as a partner, as a kind of modernist partner, take them on these world tours and have them talk in depth about, well, we love it in America, we're as American as apple pie, like, we look, I'm wearing a kufi and my wife has a hijab, and we're living great as Muslims. And that's because why? We're moderates. we don't practice these parts of Islam because this is not a part of Islam. This is just culture. Or we don't practice polygyny, for example, like having multiple wives, because, oh, that's just cultural. Or, yeah, it was for the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when there were a lot of wars and there were a lot of widows, so you had to have multiple wives. But now we, you know, clearly don't have that same problem, so that's not applicable to our time. So we're imams, monogamous imams, and they want to present American Muslims as a kind of model, because that is very influential, unfortunately, for the rest of the Muslim world.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think, to like create a mindset amongst Muslims that you can live as a perfect Muslim under a liberal system.
order.
Look at the Muslim, look at the people in America, when in fact Islam is something that sort of it is meant to overtake every element of society, in a sense, right? Whether it's legal, whether it's, now obviously we're not promoting that you know, implement Sharia or something like that here in the West, but you know, for Muslims and Muslim societies, it is telling them that no, you can implement the Western model and still be, you know, have, you know, perfect Islam. I think that's one of the ideas behind promoting the Western model or the Western Muslim as sort of the ideal, that look, they're doing it, so you can do it too, and you don't need to think about Islam, and you can continue to divorce Islam from your politics and divorce Islam from your moral and social sort of settings.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Muslims have these aspirations wherever they are, and this is what Islam teaches, that you have to aspire to change your society. So even if you're living in a non-Muslim society, and even if there is a non-Muslim government or non-Muslim legal system, you have to do what? You do dawah. You call to Islam, you invite people to Islam, and the intention is that if you do that enough, and as over time more people come into Islam, until maybe after 3, 4, 5 generations or less, you're able to turn a non-Muslim society into a Muslim society through dawah, through calling. That is the intention that Muslims should have, but that's a different mindset than what these modernists are preaching. They're preaching that no, you are perfectly good as a Muslim living by yourself. In your household, you pray and you fast, and you know, you don't need to call to Islam. Or if you call to Islam, just focus on aqidah, you know, quote unquote aqidah, like just focus on Allah. Don't like preach Islam as a complete way of life or as a system that governs everything, including government, including economics, including family relations. Just preach it as just like a Christianized version, like a Christian idea of faith in your heart. And there's no contradiction between being a fully traditional Muslim and being like this model minority amongst others, and you live in this beautiful collage or this beautiful fabric of different religions and cultures. Like, that's not what Islam actually teaches, but they are promoting this in order to further liberalize and secularize Muslims.
Just on the point of dawah, I think it's a good place to put a plug in here for Project Ihya Dawah. We do have dawah tables and street dawah that goes on. So I'd encourage everyone, inshallah, to try to be a part of that. As Brother Daniel mentioned, that is the aspiration of a Muslim, right? That how Islam can eventually, spread and everybody be brought into and, shown the beauty of Islam, and, how Islam can become a part of every aspect of our life, regardless of where we are. That is the aspiration of every Muslim. But Musab, if we can get into that list and that chart as well. Yeah,
Make it a little bigger. It's hard to see the font.
Yeah. Is that good?
Yeah, is this good? Okay. So here's a table on marker issues. So why don't you walk us through this, Brother Daniel?
Okay, it's hard to see the full chart because it only has 3 columns per page, but really it should be seen as having, I think, 6 or 7 columns.
Yeah. So you have radical fundamentalists, scriptural fundamentalists, conservative traditionalists, and on the next page you'll see the rest of the 4. Reformist traditionalists, modernists, mainstream secularists, and radical secularists. And they have their positions on each of these, or topics.
Yeah, marker issues. So, like, if you look at democracy, the radical fundamentalists say that democracy is a wrongful creed. Sovereignty and the right to legislate belong to God alone. That's the radical, the fundamentalist jihadis. Like, but if you tell a Muslim of sound belief and thought, will say, yeah, well, that's of course what we believe. That's what.
I think that's what Islam prevailing teaches. Prevailing idea amongst probably a lot of Muslims.
A lot of Muslims, we would say definitely the educated Muslims in the sense of Islamic education, sound understanding. Like, that's what we know. Like, how can a man-made system be superior to to God's legislation, for example? But then there's gradation. So the next, if you can just make it a little bit larger, because I can't see. Or I can just go to the original. Islam is a form of democracy. The West has no right to define what democracy should look like, and the Islamic form is superior because it rests on the only correct and perfect religion. So you see the slight gradation from the radicals. The scripturals say that, well, you think democracy is good? Well, Islam is democracy. Islam also promotes democracy. So you see a slight shift. It's not a full rejection of democracy. It's actually an appropriation of democracy as being Islamic, and our Islamic democracy is superior to anything that's in the West. So that's the scriptural fundamentalists. Then the conservative traditionalists, there is some room for democratic instruments in the interpretation of Islamic practice in community life and in certain sectors of public life. So shura, basically. A concept that is Islamic, like shura, mashwara, we're going to bring it. That's actually democracy. And in certain aspects of legislation, public policy, we have to have shura, right? That's democracy, right? So that's just one other degradation. Then the reformist traditionalist. Go ahead.
Right. And I was just going to say, we see this tactic again to use sort of Islamic terms and terminologies and tools and frameworks within that are found within the larger, and kind of, make them into like their overall philosophies to meet with the Western model.
Exactly. I mean, they do this with every religion, except in every religion, it's like a different appropriation that they use. So, for example, with Islam, they bring in maslaḥa, they bring in the idea of ijtihad, like we have to have a new ijtihad. Sometimes you have some reformists referring to like Meccan Islam versus Medinan Islam. Like the Meccan Islam is more concerned with rituals like praying and fasting and pilgrimage, and then Medinan Islam has all of these different rules and regulations that contradict human rights. So we just have to follow a Meccan Islam because we're still kind of in the Meccan period now in the modern world. Like that's another instrument that they use. But in other religions, like in Judaism, they have the concept of the Sanhedrin and this kind of overall judiciary body that is supposed to consist of rabbis, head rabbis who determine the law. And the modernist Jews post-Enlightenment used the kind of argument that, well, the temple, because the Sanhedrin was located on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, that's been destroyed. The second temple has been destroyed. We don't have a third temple. Therefore, we can't have Judaism influencing politics and the law. So that's their argument that they used, according to the logic of Judaism, to secularize. And Christians, the same thing. The Christian, especially the Protestants, said that, well, Jesus came to abolish the law. The Mosaic law is no longer applicable. And if you accept Jesus, then that's sufficient. This is not how Christians, though, traditionally, even the Protestants understood the advent of Jesus. They didn't understand it as Jesus comes and he abolishes the entirety of Mosaic law, because things like homosexuality, for example, they didn't believe, like Martin Luther didn't think that Jesus comes and then now homosexuality is permitted and you have sexual freedom and you don't no longer punish the adulterers. That's not what the traditional Protestants believed. But then post-Enlightenment, because of the reforms of Christianity, now you have this idea that no, Jesus has come, so all of the Mosaic law has to be abolished, because there's a new covenant with Jesus, supersessionism. So this is how they take concepts that are found within the religion and they use it for secularizing purposes.
SubhanAllah. And we can see it's the same thing for every one of these. It's you basically start on one end, and also this, I guess, one thing to say, it doesn't necessarily mean for all of these issues that whatever's the most on the left is the most right. It probably is for most of them, but there will probably be certain ones where, because this is their categorization, right? It's interesting to me, like scripture. I guess we should read, exactly how they define them and how they define each one of these. But a scriptural fundamentalist, would they really differ with a radical fundamentalist on this? Or even, I feel like you could have conservative traditionalists holding the same position. You get what I'm saying? So it's interesting how they've broken it down on this particular one. But then you have human rights, individual liberties, right? Erroneous, decadent concepts that lead to corruption. The full imposition of Sharia creates a good and just society. And then the next step down is humans need guidance and control, but these must be reasonable and fair, and set down in the Sunnah, Quran Sunnah. Islam properly lived. So we can see they have this staircase going down. Polygamy, right? This is interesting. It's permitted and there's nothing wrong with it. It's superior to Western immorality and serial divorce. Versus next one, permitted as a way to enhance public and individual morality, but not for self-indulgence. So now they've qualified it, right? Permitted, now third level down, permitted under certain circumstances, including when all wives are treated equally as the Quran requires, and only if local laws permit it. If local law permits it, but monogamy is superior, right? So you can just, what's the next one?
Yeah, that kind of. So it's, some of the gradation is about emphasis. What does the scriptural fundamentalist emphasize as opposed to the quote unquote radical fundamentalist? So yes, it's not a clear boundary between one or the other. They kind of bleed into each other. But you see a lot of these people who claim to be very traditional, and they'll bring up texts from traditional fiqh that says, oh, did you know that marrying a second wife is actually discouraged? It's actually makruh to marry a second wife. And they'll present that and they'll say, see, that this is why even within the traditional texts of fiqh, monogamy is preferred. And they'll push that onto social media, and a bunch of feminists will start retweeting it or reposting it. See, we always knew. We are card-carrying traditional Muslims, and we believe in the importance of fiqh and the madhahib and the tradition. But, this shows us that the emphasis or the idea of multiple wives, this is something that is not for everyone, and it's something that could even be makruh. But in reality, when you go to the context of those texts and those passages, they've completely or distorted and lied about what the texts actually say. No scholar has said that getting a second wife is makruh. It's only like disliked, or it's only because of certain other factors. Like you cannot support or you cannot be just with your first wife, or there are other factors that make it disliked for you, or in some cases even impermissible for you to get a second wife or a third wife. That's what the context is, but they just cherry pick and they selectively quote, or they just mistranslate in some cases these passages from traditional fiqh to justify a liberal perspective on multiple wives.
Subhanallah. And also, one other thing is like Islam, like you mentioned, it's submission, right? And a lot of times they will play on they'll play on the emotions of, for example, Muslim women. They'll use that, and naturally a man is weak towards his woman. He doesn't want to see her hurt. He doesn't want to. But for even a Muslim, all right, who for whom Islam is more important than her own emotions, she's gonna see the larger game at play here, and she's gonna say, no, it doesn't matter, if my if this caters to my own desires, but I'm not gonna sacrifice Islam. I'm not gonna sacrifice what the truth is, for this, to play into the hands of the people who would like to see Islam destroyed. So
just on a side point, I was saying that they don't even just stop at just saying, look, this position exists within Islam. They usually sometimes say like, oh, the traditionals are trying to hide this from you and they don't want you to know, and they try to kind of like distort the whole thing. But that's the side point.
Yeah. And then there's like, okay, hudud, right? And it's interesting, right? Like, why are hudud? Why is that such an important issue, right? Like a lot of people, they may not understand. The reason is because these hudud, they're mentioned explicitly in the Quran, right? They're qat'iyu thubut, qat'iyu dilala. So they're in the Quran. So the Quran is mutawatir. There's no question about that having come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Muslim mind, right? Or even like objectively, we can trace it back because it's transmitted. It's by mass transmission. And then you have it's qat'iyu dilala. Because they're very explicit, right? You can't like really interpret these verses in different ways. Well,
not all of it is in the Quran. Some of it is in Hadith, but it is established with tawatur.
For example, wasariqu, like certain ones, certain hudud would be like wasariqu wasariqatu faqta'u aydiyahuma. Yeah, and there may be some of them which are in hadith, and you can shed light on that. But like, for example, wasariqu wasariqatu faqta'u aydiyahuma jaza'an bima kasaba nakalan min Allah, or azani wazani fajlidu kulla wahidin minhuma mi'ata, and even and do not let mercy overtake you, right? So it's like very, very explicit. And it creates a problem for like modernist scholars who will try to undermine these, because then they have to kind of throw away a lot of usul al-fiqh, right, with it.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's go. And actually, like why is what is usul al-fiqh? Why is it important? Why can't we just go on, maslaḥa, mafsada, for example? Like what is the purpose of usul al-fiqh, right? Like usul al-fiqh is like principles of deducing from the text, and the whole purpose is that how do we not like just give our opinion, right? There should be no bias. It should be based on deduction, right? Not based on subjective opinion. So we have a process, and we have a rule that we put. We have rules that we put the text through, and then out comes a ruling. So if we change one, like, because it's like you coded something, and now you like okay, you have this you have all these like rules that they're the framework, they're at the framework level, and the nata'ij just kind of come out. So now if you want to change one natija, or you want to change the fruit of one ruling, you have to mess with the underlying framework, right? And if you mess with the underlying framework, that screws up so many other things. And now you're no longer like being honest, to the process, and you're putting your own, biases inside of it. And that's why it's so important that, this kind of almost objective and this framework of deriving rules from the Quran and Sunnah is followed, right, consistently, right, and that's the most important thing, so that we can trust that whatever nata'ij we're coming to, they're not just like somebody's whim or desire.
Yeah, the whole point of usul al-fiqh is to understand what the lawgiver wants. What does the lawgiver want from us? How do we understand that? Because there is revelation, but different people can understand different things from revelation. What is the correct way to understand revelation? And there are all these principles that are given by our ulama for understanding what Allah has said and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam have said. So that's exactly like you say. The reformists want you to think that you are understanding revelation, but in order to get a different result, nata'ij, as you said, you have to destroy those principles or bypass those principles, so that it just becomes a matter of, well, I'm reading the Quran, and the Quran is telling me, Allah is telling me that you need to be liberals, secularists. The Quran is telling, the Prophet ﷺ was the first feminist, actually. He was the first promoter of freedom of religion and LGBT rights. That's what the Prophet ﷺ was doing. They want the Muslim, because the Muslim is going to be hard for the Muslim to completely abandon the Quran and Sunnah. So how can we still get the result of a secularized, liberalized Muslims without necessarily abandoning the Quran and Sunnah? Well, you do that by destroying the usul, destroying that understanding of revelation. So that's what they attack, and they attack it through like emphasizing maslaḥa, as I mentioned. Another strategy that's actually mentioned in this document is emphasizing ikhtilaf. Emphasize and say that, look, the scholars have all differed, like there are different opinions on every single issue. So really, like who's to decide like what is the right thing when it comes to gender relations, when it comes to criminal punishments? Like there's all these differences of opinion. So why should we take one over the other? And what difference does it make if we have our own position in the modern world based on our understanding? So this kind of tactic is meant to undermine the scholarly tradition as a whole, so that you no longer give it any weight. Like, oh, just because Imam Abu Hanifa said something, or just because Imam Shafi'i said something, like who cares? Like they had ijtihad for their own time period based on their knowledge. We can do our own ijtihad, and they didn't even agree on these different ahkam, on these different rulings. So it's not a big deal for us to do the same thing in our time.
Yeah, and you have like you said, they promote this concept of just like picking and choosing. So one is you'll have certain views which are within the da'ira and circle of ijtihad. And then you'll have certain views which are just totally tafarrudat, and they're just unique views. And so like many ulama, they mention, like, if somebody just takes those individual views, then that person would become a fasiq, basically. However, even if you take, like, for example, within the madhahib, if you just like haphazardly take opinions from any madhab, and then you just like, okay, yes, all of the madhahib are correct, right? But like, for example, like here's an example, like let's say you have the traffic laws in America, the traffic laws in Saudi Arabia, the traffic laws in Australia, the traffic laws in India. All of these traffic laws are okay, right? They're all fine, and the purpose is to manage the flow of traffic. But for example, if I say they're all okay, and in America,
India has traffic laws, man.
let's pretend for a second they do, right? Like, let's pretend they do. But like, you in America, you say, okay, the traffic laws here are correct. In India, they're correct. So I'm going to pick and choose. So in America, they drive on the right side. Why can't I drive on the right side in India as well? Right? So why don't you try it? Even in India, that's not going to, fare very well for you. So like basically all of these are working within, are coming out of a framework, right? And they're all working within an ecosystem. And that's still a smaller issue, you can say, like versus like using liberalism as the choosing, like the driving force between what helps you choose and pick. Go ahead.
I think like we did a podcast on this, Mufti Tufail and Mufti Abrar. They had a whole podcast on Project Ihya. They can go and watch it. about how, about picking and choosing and how the madhahib actually work. But I just want to mention also another important point about usul al-fiqh is that, and I'm speaking from the Hanafi point of view, that the Hanafi usul are actually taken from, like the usul actually are extracted after the masail are actually set down first, right? In a sense, it's a little simplistic, but generally speaking, the masail were there before. So kind of like what the Quran says, what the Hadith says, what was the practice of Sahaba and the early generations, and then an asl is extracted from that. So in order to break that asl, you're breaking something that is actually an extraction from wahi, basically, or from things that are established tawaturan from the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then you want to replace that with something that you made up. It is going to create problems. It's going to come in a clash with the basis for those usul itself.
Yeah. So let's just quickly, Brother Daniel, do you have something to say? Or
Yeah, I was going to say, let's just go through one row of that chart fully.
Okay.
'Cause
Which
we
one
haven't
would
really
you like?
done that.
Which one would you like to do?
Maybe something related to women's issues.
Okay, let's go. You want to go start with hijab?
Yeah, and then I want to give you some specific quotes because
Okay.
I've described a lot of things, but maybe, as you said, like seeing it in black and white is going to show people the extent of what they're plotting. And I'll give you page numbers that you can go to and see.
Okay, sure.
You want to do hijab, maybe?
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and do hijab.
All right. If you can just make it a little bit bigger.
Okay. So would you like me to go ahead and read them?
Sure.
Okay. So radical fundamentalists. Women must wear Islamic garments, usually to cover all but the face and hands, but in some places also to conceal the face and hands. In the diaspora, that's a very interesting distinction.
Mm-hmm.
A headscarf is the acceptable minimum. It is society's job to make sure women adhere to this rule through persuasion, pressure, education, and coercion. Men must also conform visually, usually by wearing a beard and short hair. Right. Then next one is Islam, scriptural fundamentalist. Islamic covering is required for women and should be coercively enforced. Then hijab is so here basically. Is required for women, should be coercive. Okay, hijab is preferable, but it can be enforced by family, peer, and community pressure, but I guess not by law, right? Not all traditionalists agree that real coercion is also acceptable. Both genders should dress modestly. Traditionalists in conservative societies, women should cover everything but the hands and the face. Traditionalists in the West and in modern societies, the scarf and long clothing is enough. So now it's like a shift more towards like a more subjective or vague modesty versus the specifics, that we're used to.
And coercion, like that's the big deal. Like, where do you draw the line?
Yes.
Who can coerce? Like, can the government coerce, or is it just within the family context? Those are the gradations between the so-called fundamentalists.
Yeah.
And then the traditionalists, they keep, getting more watered down. So reformist traditionalists, go ahead.
Women should dress modestly. The definition of that depends on where the traditional lives and ranges from all but the face and hands to the scarf to no scarf, as long as the body is not proactively displayed.
Provocatively
displayed. Yeah. Islam does not. Then these are reformist traditionalists, right? So.
So the reformist traditionalists are still the ones who are going to be dressed in a thobe. They're going to be, know Arabic well and can give khutbahs on the mimbar, citing Quran and Hadith, and they're still seen as, the sheikh has said this. So they're still traditionalists, right? But this is their view on hijab.
Yeah. So women should dress. Then modernists, right? Islam does not require women to wear any sort of veil or head covering. There is no textual substantiation for such rules. It is up to the individual to decide what to wear. Women should not be held responsible for men's possible licentious thoughts, since the Quran clearly instructs men to lower their gaze, not to stare salaciously at women, and vice versa. Right?
Yeah. So hijab is a choice, right? And really, it's up to the men. The men have the responsibility. So forget about any kind of gender separation. Like, you can't separate women and isolate them. They should be as public as men and have full equality to all public spaces, and there's gender separation or segregation is out of the question.
Then mainstream stream secularists, Muslims can wear whatever they want, but public schools and professions where it would impinge on the performance or the rights of others can, if they see fit, prohibit the wearing of hijab, scarves, etc. So now you're going to like reverse coercion.
Yeah. Now you're getting more to like a Kemalist type of preventing hijab in the universities or in the government buildings, in courtrooms. You prevent the hijab because it's going to impinge on performance or rights within those professional contexts.
Yeah. And then radical secularists, hijab is a symbol of backwardness, and women should not want to wear it, let alone be pressured or forced into doing so. So
yeah, full on antagonism to the hijab.
Yeah, full on antagonism.
Where is their line of acceptability? Like, for example, the Strand document, obviously their goal is, I guess, it would be the last sort of stage.
The last stage is what they want in an ideal world, where Islam is, because there's no Islam in that, right?
Yeah, right.
It's anti-Islam. That's what the ideal that the Enlightenment philosophers wanted for society, like for all religion to be abandoned. But since that is too big of a goal, they are fine with the modernists. They're fine with the modernists because the modernists accommodate all of Western values and moral sensibilities and practices. If there's still some Islamic language and some remnants of Islamic practice, fine. But the modernist position is a position where Islam doesn't really have power and influence on people's lives, and that's what they want. So the modernist is tolerated and accepted, and that's one of the key partners. And what is one step beyond the modernist is the reformed traditionalist. Those are also the really valued partners because they have more credibility to a Muslim audience, whereas a modernist may not have the same level of credibility to the religious practicing Muslims.
And is there a sense or an understanding amongst them that if we get them to this level, then the rest of it is just going to happen naturally, that it's just a slippery slope downward, or
Yeah.
I mean downwards, I guess, to what our eventual goal is?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Like once we just get started on this slippery slope, it's only a matter of time before everyone becomes a radical secularists.
Let's go through
That's
one
why
more.
I think it's also important for Muslims to be very, I guess you can say stern and strict about where they stand, on these particular issues, because the other side has already understood that it's a slippery slope down to the end. So it's important to be well guarded regarding some of these issues and stand firmly where we are.
Yeah. Let's go through one more before we start, wrapping it up. So public participation of women, there must be radical fundamentalists. There must be maximum separation of women from men. Women should be excluded from the public domain to the fullest extent possible. Then scriptural fundamentalists, Iranian-style Shia fundamentalism, women should play an active role in society and political life, but there must be strict segregation, and the highest offices in justice and governance are reserved for men. Sunni governance is the domain. Sunni governance is the domain of women. Women can be active in fields related to children and social matters. Then conservative traditionalists, women are responsible for the family. If that is completely taken care of, they can be active in certain professions and in community and public life, but in a subsidiary function, right? Then reformed traditionalists, women are responsible first for the family, which is a very important role, but they can also take part in economic and public and political life, where they bring an added female perspective. They can hold high office as women did during Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time. In the view of some, this excludes the position of head of state. Then modernists, family and community are important in Islam, and both genders should take responsibility there. All professions and all types of public and political offices are open to women. This was the case in Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, when women even fought in his army, were appointed to him to be judges, and even led men in prayer, and certainly is the case today. Right? So mainstream secularist, discrimination is illegal. Equal rights and opportunities are the desirable norm. And finally, all forms of inequality should be eliminated, right? So subhanAllah, how important is it for ulama? Like, you have scholars, and because they're not aware of, these, I would say covert, but it's not really. It's very overt, right? These strategies to undermine Islam and really steer the whole community to a certain direction. But because they're not aware of this, they're still falling in these, useless debates, not knowing that this is actually set up. The stage has already been set up. So, how important do you think it is for like students of knowledge to have some sort of background in this, so that they don't fall prey to these things?
I think it's absolutely critical. Obviously, I think that not knowing what this game plan is makes you that much more susceptible to falling into it, and it is covert. I know the document is not covert. We can publicly access it through a Google search, but the how this document is actually implemented within traditional institutions, that is covert. That is completely covert, and you don't really know who the operatives are. And the operatives aren't going to be like these double agents, like, oh, it's someone who is going to Washington in a suit and tie and then is coming to the madrasa in a thobe and kufi, like, and is pretending to be Muslim. That's not necessarily how it works, even though in some countries that literally might be the way it works. But more so, it's a kind of soft influence, So you have traditionalists who might be at the madrasa, or traditionalists who might be at Azhar University, or traditionalists at whatever mainstream Sunni institution of Islamic learning. And you want to move them more from the, more hardline traditionalists to more of a reformed traditionalists. And there are a lot of ways that you can peddle that influence. Like, you can offer some of these scholars or imams, you can offer them positions, like very visible positions as chaplains, for example, at universities, or chaplains even at major hospitals, or even sports teams, or whatever, or prisons, like very visible roles with high salaries as chaplains, or being in the universities, like give them a university position. We're just talking about the West now, for example. Invite them, have them come on to speak on TV programs, like mainstream TV programs. Oh, we have an imam, a local imam wants to tell us about the importance of Ramadan. Like, have those kinds of invitations. Or, oh, there's this new sports season, and we want each religion to give a prayer, like baseball, I don't know, or football. And we have a pastor, and we have a rabbi, and we have an imam. Like, come, and they're going to give like these kinds of perks. And what's understood, it's not like an explicit thing, like, oh, you better start promoting reformed traditionalism and better start teaching like these things about women. It's just understood that if you want to continue to be tapped for these highly visible events or roles, you have to be a moderate. Like, you have to, be a friendly, nice, good, moderate Muslim. And it's just psychologically they fall into that, and then they try to justify things. They try to justify their moderation, and they appeal to a lot of these kinds of texts, distortion of text, manipulation of text, to justify their moderate positions or their outright reform positions. And I mean, that's the sunny side of it. The darker side of it is when there's actual intimidation, because you have a lot of imams. Probably there isn't a single prominent imam in the United States that hasn't been visited by the FBI, that hasn't been visited by law enforcement. And just that, like, that law enforcement doesn't even have to do anything. Just the visit scares them so much that they're like, oh, I was planning to do a khutbah on the importance of hijab or the importance of Sharia, but maybe I should give my khutbah on the importance of voting. Maybe I should this week, I don't want to get another visit from the FBI. Maybe I should do the khutbah today on how amazing women are in Islam. Like, that's the kind of soft influence. It's still a very significant in how it changes the way that they teach Islam. And I have had imams privately admit to me that when they, for example, are teaching certain classes, going through tafsir, like they'll skip entire sections of tafsir, or they're teaching fiqh, they'll skip or quickly gloss over entire abwab, like chapters of fiqh. Why? Because they just are uncomfortable, or they feel like they'll lose their position because the head of the masjid board is a modernist, is a doctor, right? Just this modernist doctor. And if you're an imam who's teaching certain things like a more fundamentalist or traditional view, then you're going to lose your job, for example. So the Muslim community in itself does a lot of self-regulation and self-censoring and self-modernization that is still extremely impactful in a bad way. We don't even have to have like a covert operation where it's like someone is taking checks from the CIA or the White House in order to distort Islam. There's enough of that that's happening. And to your original point, we have to make sure that the imams are young students of knowledge who want to be imams. They want to become an alim, for example. They understand the way that these pressures work and how to just internally, in terms of tazkiyah, work against that. Because it's very, very easy to fall into just purely from pressure, like peer pressure or social pressure or job pressure.
Yeah, and in terms of that's even more dangerous in the sense that it feels like it's coming from within, and this is just a natural change within, the Islamic scholarship when it's really, it does have influences and more sinister motives.
And also, given that there has been collaboration between, government and big tech, in the past, we saw that, right? So how much do you think, like, for example, promoting certain, certain people, making them more visible, like making the algorithm in their favor? Do you think that these are, tactics that are also used?
No, it's explicitly a tactic that was taken up in the Obama administration as a part of countering violent extremism, partnership with Google and other tech companies. But Google was what was mainly reported on, that we have to fight extremism because of ISIS. This is when ISIS came onto the scene. We have to fight ISIS through our algorithm. And the way to do that is if you have more conservative, more conservative fatwa websites and more conservative preachers are being promoted in the algorithm. Why? Because that's what a lot of Muslims like. Like, Muslims tend to be more conservative people, so they are more likely to click on those links and engage with those websites. So they're being promoted in our search results. We have to actively contradict our own algorithm and either ban those results or bury the results, like in the third or fourth or fifth page, and instead artificially boost these other moderate voices, the moderate fatwa sites, the moderate hadith websites, because there are different places where you can find hadith translations. Let's promote the hadith translation sites that are more moderate and emphasize tolerance and liberal values. And all that has been documented, like, because Google was like promoting this, like, see, we're doing so much, like, we're a good company, we're doing so much to fight terrorism. And those programs are still in place, and probably they've become a lot more sophisticated. So you'll notice that there are certain imams and there are certain websites that always end up in your search results when you search for an Islamic topic. That's not necessarily because that content is the most accurate, or it's the best, or it's necessarily even the most popular. It might not even be popular content at all, but Google is artificially raising that. And sometimes Google will send specialists, like search engine optimization specialists, to certain institutions, like Muslim institutions, to help them, like to train them so that they can improve their site technically, so that it ranks higher as well. So it's like multi-layered, this project to raise certain perspectives on Islam, the moderate perspective, and to drown out or to bury the more conservative or the more traditional voices.
That's interesting, because somebody actually sent me a list 2 days ago. It had a list of websites and they were like, somebody sent him the list, and it says that these have some like sort of Zionist or whatever, promoters or backing or something like that. So I told him, listen, I don't know about the details of all of these websites, but it's always good to go to your ulama that you trust and are well known for, being traditional ulama, and just kind of get your knowledge from there. You're always taking a risk when you're online. But
were there any other portions of the document you wanted me to highlight? We can quickly go through those, and if you
Yeah, we could. You can go to page 54.
Okay, just do a couple and within 5 minutes, I think. Okay. This one right here?
I don't think you can see it.
I can't see.
Okay. So modernism has respected intellectuals and leaders?
Yeah, so go to the paragraph that says the public in general, if you can find that.
The public in general. Is that, this is, you're saying page 54 of the document?
Yeah, of the document.
Okay.
Should be almost at the end.
Yeah, the public in general. Okay.
Yeah. The public in general should be better informed and educated about the process of interpreting their religion, so as not to be at the mercy of unscrupulous or uneducated self-appointed authorities, rather than accepting that if some statement claims to base itself on a hadith, they need to understand the complexity of what hadith really means and how interpretations are supposed to be developed. There are innumerable Islamic scholars who can easily explain this, but they're not the ones who are running the religious education programs, formal and informal, legal and illegal, in the Islamic world. They need to make an effort to raise the standard of religious knowledge to turn Muslims into, quote, educated consumers of hadith and fatwas and interpretations. At the same time, until that can be accomplished, a body of counter hadith should be made available to those who want more tolerant, egalitarian, democratic societies, but are being persuaded that the changes they seek are un-Islamic. It's quite easy to assemble the necessary evidence that will support reform and liberalism. There are not that many contentious topics. They could be covered by half a dozen handbooks or pamphlets. So a lot is revealed in that, right? One thing that is revealed is that they want Muslims to be more educated about fiqh. Isn't that great? They want Muslims to be more educated on usul al-fiqh. Isn't that a good thing? But the way that they're using it and the way that they're trying to democratize knowledge. They're trying to democratize knowledge so that it becomes an equal playing field. And instead of people relying on the traditional authorities, the traditional schools of fiqh, who are contrary to liberal secularism, they want everyone to be a mini mufti. Everyone, all Muslims, just have your own interpretation, your own understanding. Just because a self-appointed authority says something, no, you have to question that. You have to question it. So what ends up happening, the intended result of that, is that the general masses, based off of a delusion of thinking that now they have enough knowledge that they can bypass traditional scholarly authorities, they're just going to end up following their desires. They're going to be even more susceptible to be influenced by popular media, by social media, by these kinds of psyops, and people will just follow their desires. So this is a way to just cut off the Muslim masses from scholarly authorities who are the most likely to resist or to reject liberal reform.
This is kind of a lesson that I guess they're drawing from a historical, I guess in their minds, a historical, counterpart, which was when the Catholic Church was basically undermined, which was supposed to be I guess you could say, the tradition with the Protestant movement. Am I mistaken in thinking that this is something that they might have extracted from that let's just open it up and democratize it, and then everybody's interpretation holds equal weight?
Exactly. Yeah. Similar thing happened with Protestantism and the destruction of the authority of the Catholic Church.
Cool. Is there anything else, or do you want to say some final words? And
how about we look at one more paragraph?
Yeah, sure. What page?
It should also be on page 54, of additional great importance. Is it there?
54. Oh,
maybe.
50. Is it a beginning of a paragraph?
It might not be of additional great importance.
Okay, here it is.
Yeah, of additional great importance are the legal opinions that say how Quranic injunctions should be interpreted and applied. There are 4 Orthodox Sunni schools of law that determine this, plus the Shia Jafari school. Although their rulings vary, differing, for example, over whether and under what circumstances you can remarry someone from whom you have been divorced or when thieves should have their hands amputated, they're considered equally correct. Countries, or at least regions, usually are affiliated with one or the other school of law, but the study is arcane and the application complicated. Many fascinating examples of how hadith translates into social policy can be found in Khalid Abul Fadl's authoritative study, Speaking in God's Name. He reviews the often fantastic leaps of logic that have enabled ultra-conservative Saudi jurists to issue religious decisions or fatwas on such topics as high heels, the wonder bra, and air travel by women. Fatwas can manipulate theological content in a variety of ways. The scholar can draw on a hadith without mentioning the fact that most scholars consider that particular hadith shaky. He can take a hadith out of context, or he can draw questionable analogies to apply ancient hadith to contemporary issues. Obviously, there are no existing hadiths for many of the troubling issues that come up day to day in the third millennium. In deciding which general principle to apply, the scholar has great leeway, and especially if he is part of a movement such as Wahhabism, where other scholars share his worldview and will back his interpretation. So this is, a general strategy, again, to undermine the schools and say that, well, it's about interpretation and there can be different ways to interpret hadith or the nusus. So this is their strategy to really undermine Islamic education, like Islamic scholarly authority. And they understand that once they do that, then the Muslim community is going to be ripe for the picking. Like, you can just modernize the community at will.
Well, Jazakallah khair, Brother Daniel, for giving us your valuable time. I know you have.
Do you have any final words?
Yeah.
Final message.
Yeah, my final words are just to
not
reiterate.
not your final words, but like your final words for the episode.
Yeah, final words before the FBI busts in and takes me away for good. No, my final words for this stream, inshallah, is Muslims, we need to not be naive. We need to really recognize the kinds of plotting that people have done, our enemies have done. And these are enemies that really don't mind to see us completely eliminated, wiped out, literally. They're supporters of mass killing of Muslims. And their whole agenda is for that purpose, is if they're not going to wipe out all Muslims, then at least wipe out Islam from the face of the earth. So let's not underestimate our enemies. And my other hope is that Muslims can establish institutions that can also do this kind of work for the defense of Islam and for the defense of Muslims. You have a think tank here, RAND, that is being funded with hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Muslims also have hundreds of millions of dollars. In the Ummah, we have that kind of wealth, even if in just the West or just in America. But we are not really spending our money in the kind of way that can counter these efforts. Where is the analog, the Muslim analog to RAND? We don't have really much funding or spending on intellectual efforts specifically for the purpose of countering this war on Islam, this battle for hearts and mind. And this is a huge shame. This is a huge disaster. So the previous, in America specifically, or the West in general, the previous generation did a lot of good work, and their legacy is defined by establishing masajid, building many masajid, building many madaris, Islamic schools, building a lot of halal food options. That kind of work has been amazing and important and vital. But our generation, my generation, Muslims that are between their 20s and 50s, like, I think our contribution really should be to establish think tanks, to establish institutions that are dedicated specifically for this, what is ultimately a combative role. Like, it's a fight, right? If you build a mosque, if you build a madrasa, that's not necessarily it's not really going contrary to the culture. It's not going contrary necessarily to efforts to undermine Islam. it's less confrontational. But we need to be more confrontational, because look at what they are doing. Like, look at what they're planning, and the fruits of this, the rotten fruits of this, we're seeing it in our generation, in the coming generation. So what are we doing to combat it? I think our legacy within our generation should be to establish these kinds of institutions that are going to be confrontational in combating these types of problems. And we can't shy away from that confrontation. We can't shy away from that challenge, because literally this is the future of Islam that hangs in the balance. And as we said earlier in the program, what happens in the West and what happens in America is going to affect the entire ummah, because the enemies of Islam project all of that reformed Islam, all of the modernist Muslims, as models and examples for the rest of the ummah. So we have even more of a responsibility and even more of a burden, because we can establish institutions in America and legally protect those institutions in ways that other Muslims in other parts of the world can't do. They don't have the same kind of legal protections. They don't have the same kinds of protection from an authoritarian putting them in a dungeon if they start coming up with an institute that can counter feminism and reformism, etc. So we have even more of a responsibility. And if we do not meet that challenge, then that's a huge dereliction of duty. That's a huge shame that we're going to be asked about it on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So that's my final message for the podcast.
Jazakumullah khair, Brother Daniel Haqiqatjou, for that advice. And I guess we all heard it, especially for students of knowledge. Work towards at least informing yourselves and then starting on these kind of projects, and also the responsibility of the ummah at large to support projects like that. Having said that, I would encourage or let everybody know that you can also take courses that Brother Daniel Haqiqatjou is teaching on Al-Asna Institute. There's a range of topics that are discussed and subjects that are offered. So do have a look at that, inshallah. You can also visit the Muslim Skeptic and read his articles and other material that are posted there. And with that, I want to say Jazakallah khair to Brother Daniel Haqiqatjou for giving us his valuable time. And inshallah, until next time, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.